The Captain's Log Radio, with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.
Hey, welcome to the Captain's Log Radio. I'm Captain Jonathan Moss, and with me today, a man I didn't know I needed to become friends with until it happened, and now I'm so blessed and glad I'm friends with this dude. This is Captain Chris Shultz from Jax Charters up in Jacksonville. Chris, how's it going, buddy?
Good, Jonathan. I'm really glad to call you a friend now, too. I know I'm really happy that Travis Thompson was able to introduce us and get us talking. And then, man, it seems like within a couple of weeks we were on the water together, throwing flies at snapper.
Yeah. So here's how that went down for those listening. Captain Travis Thompson is a mutual friend of ours. Great dude. He's been on the radio show already once. We talked about the right to hunt and fish. And Travis is like, dude, Jonathan, I got a guy. His name is Captain Chris Shultz. He's up in Jacksonville. This dude is insane with the stuff he's doing offshore. You need to meet this guy. Let me introduce you. And so we immediately get onto a text thread, and Chris sends me a picture of a red snapper on fly offshore. And I'm like, dude, what in the world? He's like, bro, we were sight fishing these things. I didn't realize, Chris, that this was a bucket list fish that I needed, okay? You know, you don't think about going offshore and sight fishing red snapper. So tell me about that. Tell me, how did you come across this? What were you doing? What led you to be able to find these fish offshore and catching them on the surface in 100 feet of water?
Well, red snapper in North Florida, red snapper in all of the South Atlantic is definitely a hot topic. And
Yeah.
I've been fishing here pretty much my whole life, guiding for the last 8 years. And we have some spots offshore where it's, you're trying to kingfish and you're catching a red snapper on the flatlines while you're slow trolling. And seeing that, it's like, hey, if these fish are hanging out in the water column, 20, 30 feet down, which is what we're seeing on the screen, probably wouldn't be that hard to get them on surface. And so, we started messing around with it. The first time we did it, we live chummed pogies because I just happened to have, probably a couple hundred pogies left at the end of the day. We had our limited kingfish, and I'm looking to spend a little extra time, kill another hour. You know how that goes on a charter. So I start chunking pogies over the number while we're on spot lock on the trolling motor. And I'm not kidding you, within a minute, we had red snapper blowing up pogies on the surface all around the boat. And I didn't have a fly rod that trip, but we started catching them on spinning rods and just having fun with it. And then, next trip out, I had a day off. I grabbed the fly rod, went back to the same spot, did the same thing, live chummed them up. We actually ended up with blackfin and snapper that day.
Oh, man. So you took a blackfin on fly?
We didn't get the blackfin on the fly. That was on the flat line. But we had blackfin and snapper just crashing baits. I mean, because the pogies want to hide essentially on your boat. You're the only structure out there.
Right.
So you're throwing them out, and they're swimming straight back to the boat, and that's drawing those fish in. I mean, you could watch the fish eating right under the motor, just like you saw.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer that action brings action.
Exactly.
These fish are freaking out, causing a frenzy, when the other fish in the area are hearing that and going, whoa, what is that? I got to go and explore, and I can investigate. And next thing you know, you got the schools right behind the transom.
Yeah. So it started out, we're doing it with live baits, kind of more of a summertime thing. And then, after messing around with it for a while, I realized you could probably do it with dead, it's not as easy to get them on the transom and eating flies with the chum, but you really don't need live bait if you're patient and you can get them happy, and you just let them keep eating, and then like you saw, all of a sudden, like that trigger switches and it's game on.
Yeah. And we're going to dive more into that when we get to the specifics of our episode, but it was, bro, that might be my personal favorite fish of the year. I'm very fortunate with the show, with the Captain's Log, that I get to travel and fish and do some really cool things. That was probably my coolest fish on fly for 2024. definitely one I didn't expect ever, and then had that opportunity. I was like, this is insanity. But before we get into the specifics of our episode, let's talk about your location. Let's talk about what you do for a charter service. I want people to really know the ins and outs of Captain Chris Shultz, but all this stuff because you don't just do the offshore, you do a mix of everything. I think you're running 3 boats, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yeah, I do a little bit of everything. And really to stay busy in Northeast Florida, it helps to have access to that. We have a really good inshore red fishery. We're kind of like the southern low country.
Yeah.
The area that I'm fishing, I get to watch the Spartina transition to mangroves. So if I drive, 20 minutes north from my house and fish, the north side of the St. Johns River, going up towards Fernandina, anywhere in that area, you're primarily in Spartina flats. If you go from Volano south towards Palm Coast, you get into that mangrove inshore fishery. And so it's kind of cool playing on that transition. We see snook, but we also have an insane red fishery. We get a lot of tarpon in the summertime. We get a great king fishery in the summertime. And then really this time of year, everyone in Northeast Florida that fishes offshore is thinking about wahoo. I mean, it's the secret's out. We have one of the best wahoo fisheries in the world here.
Yeah.
I mean, to win a wahoo tournament in North Florida, you need 100-pound average fish.
Yeah.
Which is just insane compared
Which
to
is a giant,
almost anywhere else.
Giant wahoo.
Absolute giant. Yeah. And so, that's primarily what I want to be doing this time of year. But the days that you can go wahoo fish are very limited. The last few weeks we've probably had 3 good days. So having that balance.
And for those at home listening, that's because we have these cold fronts move through. And in Florida, when you get a cold front, it's windy. You can't just have a cold front come through and it'd be like, oh man, it's like 45 degrees outside and it's beautiful and it's slicked out. Those days are rare. They just don't exist. Okay. So when you get these cold fronts moving in, it gets really windy, it gets really rough, and it's hard to get offshore. And that surprises a lot of people who aren't really into fishing or don't have enough fishing experience because they're thinking, oh, we're in Florida, we're just going to go fishing. Back home, it's 20 below and it's freezing. But in Florida, it's 45 and I'm walking around in shorts. You might be walking around in shorts, but it doesn't mean that we can go fishing and go offshore and do so safely. And that's the big thing.
Absolutely. Almost every day we can go fishing, but where we can go is determined by the weather. And for our offshore fishery here, it's a 50-mile run before you're putting lines in the water. Almost, any true blue water trip, that's about it. Maybe 45, but you're essentially going about 50 miles before you start fishing. So on a nor'easter, 5 to 6 foot, 6-second interval, the last thing you want to do is make a 60-mile run in a 30-foot boat, just getting your teeth kicked in.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It's a pick your
5-second interval. Think about what that means. Is you have a wave, and then 5 seconds later, you have another wave, and then 5 seconds later, you have another. Oh, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's plenty of time. No, bro, that's big. That's big movement. And you said 5 to 6 foot seas. That's a 5 to 6 foot wave coming at you every 5 seconds. That's a washing machine. That's worse than a washing machine. And so if you're not into offshore fishing, these are the things that offshore captains like Captain Chris Shultz have to deal with on a daily basis. I got a couple of friends, Chris, that are that's their bread and butter is strictly offshore fishing. And they have to probably cancel half of their trips a year because of the weather. And I don't know how you guys survive. And that's the beauty of what you're doing, having multiple boats, being able to run inshore and still get out. You said it. We can still go fishing. We just might not be able to do all the stuff that I offer. Or it depends on the ramps that we can go to, depending on what the wind's doing. But no, absolutely, man. It's this time of year. It can be really brutal. Do you get a sailfish bite at all up that way?
We do. I'll be honest, that's something I'm not personally I don't spend a lot of time doing that. We catch them as bycatch a lot in the spring when we're live baiting for kingfish.
Hmm.
But there is a fall sailfish run, the El Pescador out of St. Augustine this year. I think they only had 12 boats fishing it, and they had like 160 some fish in 2 days.
Wow.
So
Wow.
if you dial it in and get on that bite, it can be really good.
Yeah, I
It's
know
just
right
not something that
now.
we really do very much.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I have some friends down in the northern part of South Florida, Boynton Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and this time of year, I mean, it's sailfish country. They are just catching a lot of sails. But yeah, I love the offshore game. I grew up doing a lot of bottom fishing. Never
Mhm.
really did any trolling. They were always meat trips,
Yep.
and if it was legal, it was coming back. And we ended up, dude, we'd catch hundreds of fish, and we'd come home and we would fillet fish for hours, hours. It felt like it was. It wasn't felt like it was legit hours, and it wasn't to fill a freezer. We just fed a lot of people. And
Hmm.
I think one of my favorite things about doing that bottom fishing game is coming home and feeding friends and having people come to my house, my family, and just knowing that I'm feeding my family with fish that I caught. And I love that, you know. You're in the hunting side as well. You do some duck hunting. And I'm not sure if you do any deer hunting, but for the same thing for me with that, I haven't gotten into deer hunting yet. It's something I want to pursue, but I love the idea of feeding my family off of things that I have harvested. And I want to do more of that in this new year. It's just I can do it with the fishing side. The hunting side is just a whole new ball game, something I have to learn and figure out. But I love that. I love that offshore game, especially though when it's slicked out. That's my favorite. You're getting to this,
Oh,
but you said a 50-mile run. You're getting there a whole lot quicker and a whole lot easier than when it's bumpy. And for you and your big old boat with them beanbag chairs and cranking the music, that ride in is just cushy. Hey, we are quickly coming up on our first break. I've got Captain Chris Shultz from Fish Jax Charters with me today. So stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.
Hey, welcome back to the Captain's Log Radio. I'm Captain Jonathan Moss, and with me today, Captain Chris Schultz, and we're Fish Jax Charters. We were talking about his area and the type of fishing that he offers, and we're really focused in on the offshore stuff. But Chris mentioned something that I have fallen in love with this style of fishing. And I love fishing the low country. I love going up to South Carolina, but in the state of Florida, in the northeast section of Florida, you have a phenomenon, something that I think is the best way if you want to chase redfish, whether that's on fly or on spin. There's an event that happens. It doesn't happen all year. There's certain times of the year that you get these events, and it's called a flood tide. And on a flood tide, what happens is you have flood tide, meaning a high tide, a higher than normal tide comes in and it floods these Spartina grass flats. Okay, so you have land with Spartina grass, and there's all these little fiddler crabs, and they're like tiny. And all of a sudden, all this water starts encroaching and on top of the land. Then it's going higher and higher, and all these little bitty fiddler crabs are trying to climb to the top. And the redfish, it's amazing. It is absolutely amazing because if you sit back off the flat and you're waiting and you're watching, and now the water's rising, you can see the redfish moving in on the Spartina grass where this flood tide is occurring. And you can see them approaching and get there, and then that tide's just right, and all of a sudden, happy tails. These redfish start putting their noses down into that muck and that mud into the grass, finding these fiddlers, feeding on the surface. It is absolutely insane. I love it. And these fish are there to do one thing: eat. They're there to eat. And when you make your presentation, whether with a fly or I've caught them on a topwater frog, like a bass lure frog, they're going to crush it. You make the right presentation, they're going to crush it. Tell me more about it, Chris. Like, how long have you been doing the flood tide thing? I know, were you doing it out of a John boat earlier this year? Is that something I saw?
Yeah, so I've been fishing flood tides for probably 10, 11 years now. I gotta give a shout out to the old Black Fly shop, Von Cochran's shop.
Yeah.
They the guys that used to work there really got me into it. Andrew, who still manages Strike Zone's fly shop now, where Black Fly.
I did an episode with Andrew, season 1, up there in Jacksonville.
Andrew's a great friend. He's the guy that really got me personally into fly fishing. My grandfather fly fished around here when I was a kid. He was fishing those redfish, back in the 90s, but I was too young to really, get out there with him. He died when I was pretty young, so I never got that experience, but I remembered it. And then, I meet Andrew, and he's doing the same thing, and he was kind of just starting out as a guide at that time. I had free time, would push me around. I don't know why he decided to take me with him, but I sucked at pulling, I sucked at casting. I was no good at all when he first started taking me, but pretty quickly got addicted to it. I already had a canoe that I would use for, shallow water inshore stuff and duck hunting. So pretty quickly I was pulling that thing through the flats, figuring it out on my own, learning new spots. Like you said, it's a really incredible glimpse into redfish behavior. And it's really the only sight fishing that we can do consistently that time of year. Those flood tides tend to overlap with the late summer, early fall, and that's our rainy season here. So low tide sight fishing is absolute crap. Our water looks like chocolate milk. If you're on the St. John's Basin that time of year, there's a lot of sediment, there's a lot of tannins. You're fishing like root beer gold, shiny baits, just hoping for a reaction strike basically when you're fishing low tides. And then on those flood tides, it's just so shallow. Even when the flats are a little bit deeper, the fish, I don't think they like that grass poking their bellies, so they'll ride a little higher in the water. And you'll see them waking, you'll see them backing. Like you said, tailing is the classic shot. That fish just nose down, tail waving, see it a mile away. Boy, once you start doing that, it's addictive. It's hard to give that up.
I'm getting goosebumps, man, thinking about it.
I'm already looking forward to our next flood tide. Yeah,
it's addictive. My first experience of that was with Captain Matt Omlor at an Old City Fly Shop.
Yep,
and
that's a great guy.
I was just like, that's it. Like, there's nothing better. There's nothing better when chasing redfish. They weren't super spooky because they're there, like I said earlier. They're there to do one thing, and they're so focused on that they weren't really spooky. And if you made a bad shot, you could, if you were quick, you could pick it up and represent your fly or your lure.
That's the beauty of the fly in the flood, is that second, third, fourth shot. A fly angler has a far greater probability of not spooking the fish and getting another shot versus a spin angler in the flood.
Yeah.
And
because it's just landing lighter. It's
landing lighter.
Presentation.
It's way quieter, and you don't have to reel that thing in, between casts. You just pick the fly right up, drop it right back down. It's that motion, you're making another presentation.
What's your go-to? If you're going to pick a fly for that, what's your go-to?
I'm an addict for the gurgler. Just takes it up another notch. If you want to put fish in the boat, a crab fly is far more effective. The gurgler, they'll miss it, they'll bump it. I
thought I had one here. I just tied a few. I use them on my charter. If you're not familiar with the gurgler, Yeah, I don't
I've
have one
got
behind my
right
computer.
here.
There you
That's
go.
a flood gurgler that we use.
Okay, so a gurgler is like a popper. Okay, but instead of a hard popper shell of a body, um, it's a piece of foam. Okay, very simple fly at its high. It's got foam. It's got craft fur. I'm here at my desk, which is also my fly tying station. Um, this because of the foam, it floats, and so it mimics a shrimp. Now, one of my concerns that I had when I first threw this gurgler at these fish was the hook on a gurgler rides down.
Mhm.
And I thought for sure we were going to get fouled up. But no, two reasons. Number one, the grass isn't like, it's not like shoal grass or turtle grass that we fish for on the flats for redfish. Okay, it's different. It's thinner. Okay, so it cuts through the fly cuts through a lot easier. Number one. Number two, it didn't take long. You made the right presentation. The fish is going to eat it like pretty quickly. That gurgling sound that it makes, that is, I mean, it is so similar to a shrimp up on the surface kicking
So,
water.
so we're also imitating a cricket. There's a lot of crickets
Oh,
in the grass, especially
that's
during
not
certain
something I've
parts of
heard
the year.
before.
And so,
Okay.
the gurgler, the first one I showed, this purple one, that's more of like your shrimp size. And then I've got another
Put
one.
that back up there. Put that back up there.
Here, I'll
See
show
how
both.
this one has a weed guard on it.
It does. It has a very stiff weed guard. That weed guard's 30-pound fluoro. So I mean
Mm,
that's pretty stiff, and that'll keep that hook
yeah.
relatively safe. And then this, they would call it the flood bug, but you see it's a lot smaller profile,
Yeah.
and that looks a
Yeah.
lot more like the little bugs that are on the surface in the flat. And it'll be
Huh.
mostly crickets. Um, and you'll see those certain times of the year where you'll push into flats and there'll be crickets all over the grass, and you can hear the
That's
slurps.
awesome.
You'll actually hear the fish slurping, and you won't see many tails when they're keyed on those crickets. You'll just see their heads rise up, grab, hear that slurp sound, and they'll work along the edge of the grass. You can almost predict, you'll see one, you'll see him again 5 feet up, and then if you watch the grass, you can kind of see the next blade that he's likely to come up on. And
Wow.
they'll
Wow.
see those crickets or crabs on the grass, and you can watch those fish come up an individual grass blade and fold that grass under so that those bugs get in the water to eat them. It's pretty
That's
cool to watch.
And again, watching that behavior, these fish are there to eat. And so you want to I want to catch them, but I love observing them. You learn so much from observing them. I had no idea about the crickets. That's new to me. I've never heard that before. That's awesome.
They'll also
There's
eat mice.
now I've tied some mice. I've never thrown any mice. But
You can get a
there's
redfish to eat a mousefly in the flood. Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. That's sick, dude. There's the saying in fly fishing, the old adage of match the hatch, and that's really referring to like these trout guys who are throwing a caddisfly or whatever fly, whatever bug has just hatched, and you're throwing a fly that is matching that natural bait, that natural bug that they're chasing. Same situation applies here. You are realizing, hey, they're keyed in on these little crickets. So let's change the profile of our fly to match what these fish are eating, and boom, game on. Dude, love that. It's awesome. Textbook, bro. Textbook. No,
It's an incredible fishery. I'm grateful to live where I live and get to experience it.
oh man. Well, the every time I've had the opportunity to fish a flood tide, I've done it in Fernandina and Amelia Island. I've done it in St. Augustine. I've done it south of St. Augustine, Palm Coast. I think that's probably the
That's it.
southernmost edge
Yeah,
that you can get
that's
to.
really that's where it is.
It's it's incredible. It is. I'm telling you, if you want to experience uh, a very incredible fly fishing for redfish deal, the flood tide is something. And honestly, being here in Orlando, I learned. You know what? I went to Orlando. The first time I learned about this, I saw some social media posts, and at the Orlando Outfitters fly shop here in town, Captain Andrew Mizell was going to be there giving a presentation on flood tide fishing. And
Hmm.
I went. Dude, this is probably 8 or 9 years ago, maybe
Yeah, I
10
actually
years
I actually
ago.
remember that. Yeah, that had to be 8, 9 years ago. Yeah.
I went to that because I thought I'm going to learn from this dude. He had an incredible presentation, and I hadn't gone up until then, until a couple years ago. But I learned a lot from that presentation from Andrew. Hey, we're quickly coming up again on another break. This is the Captain's Log Radio. I have Captain Chris Shultz with me today, talking fishing in Northeast Florida.
This is the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.
Hey, welcome back to the Captain's Log Radio. It's been an absolutely fantastic show. Captain Chris Shultz from Fish Jacks Charters up in Jacksonville, Northeast Florida. We've talked about offshore. We've talked about flood tide fishing. Talked a little bit about wahoo. But I got to experience, and I know we touched on this in the first segment. We're going to dive into our episode. I got to experience something that was just magical. I mean, it was the hard part about what I do is, and this is me being hard part sarcastic. I get to experience some really cool stuff. I've got some incredible friends who are just fishy people. And the hard part is I want to see that snook back there from New Wave Taxidermy. I want to call the Kirkhart family and be like, guys, I need 50 fish because every time I do an episode, we catch just some really cool fish that has just a really cool story. So let's talk about that story from our episode. We left in the dark. It was, I mean, literally in the dark. You've got night vision on your boat, so you can see that's on your units, your radar and GPS in front of you. You actually have a screen where you can see what's in front of you. And doing this kind of fishing is great for me because, man, I wasn't in control. You were running the boat. You knew what to do. I just sat back and relaxed till we got to the spot.
Those are the best days, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We get to our first spot, which is just to catch bait. We're in the buoy line. No big secret there. The sun was coming up, and it was just gorgeous. One of my guys, Braden, took a picture. It's one of my favorite pictures of this buoy. The colors behind it is absolutely gorgeous. And he's like, Chris comes out. It's like, hey, John, it's time to get the sabikis out and let's catch some bait. I hate with a passion sabiki rigs because they're a mess. But you drop them down, light tackle. It's a lot of fun. Catching bait's actually a lot of fun that way. We load up the bait. We caught some sardines. We caught some squid. Remember that?
We did, yeah. We had some live cuttlefish,
Yeah.
live squid.
Iridescent squid. We filled up the well with baits. We run offshore. When Chris isn't watching later, I'm gonna throw the coordinates up on the screen so everyone knows exactly where we went. Just kidding. I have no idea where we were. But we get to the first spot, and Chris starts chumming some bait. Okay. We've got chum blocks, right? You put chum blocks out in a bag.
Yep.
And then we cut up some of those baits in chunks, and we threw those out. And Chris says, just wait, and just wait. And we're waiting, and the fish rise. And it didn't take long. We had some big cudas at the boat. We had a bunch of red snapper up high. And that first spot was like, I think it was God's way of saying, hey, you're going to have an epic day, but you're going to have to work for it. Because that first spot, fish were there, but we couldn't get a fish in the boat. I think you caught one. But then you looked at me and you said, Jonathan, this is good, but we're going to go where it's better.
Yeah.
I got a spot. We're going to go where it's better. And we got there. And bro, you were lying, man. We look at the screen and literally, I think we're in like, I don't know. We're just gonna round off a number, say 100 feet of water. And I'm not gonna tell you how far, though I have the number in my head. But the screen from top to bottom is just fish. It's lit up like reds and oranges and yellows and just it's amazing. Oh my goodness, this is the spot. And it was like, are you serious right now? What's going on, bro? And you start throwing that chump, you threw that chump back out, you threw some cut bait out, and all of a sudden those fish rise up. And you can literally watch them on the screen come up higher in the water column. And next thing you know, they're right behind the boat. Like Chris told me about this via text message when we first met, which was, I want to say it was before ICAST. And I think we met at ICAST in person.
Yeah, that was the first time we met in person with ICAST. Yeah.
But he sent me these photos of these giant red snapper that he caught on fly. His clients have been catching on fly. And he told me, Jonathan, they're literally at the transom. Like this is cane pole fly fishing. This is sight fishing without having to cast very far. It's like it's right there. And seeing that, dude, seeing that, Chris, up like in real life, right? Not just imagining it, but seeing it with my eyes was unbelievable. Unbelievable. But because it's TV and we don't have an episode unless we catch fish, we pulled out the spin rods. Okay. We immediately start catching fish on spin rods. Okay. Like 8,000 Florida Fishing Products Osprey Resolute reel. And then big heavy rods, like 8-foot extra heavy and 8-foot heavy spin tackle. And we whacked them. I mean, it was literally as many as you wanted to catch. I said it on the narration. I said it that day. Those were the luckiest red snapper because Kristen mentioned it. Red snapper on the east coast of Florida, on the east coast of the United States, they are in abundance. But it's NOAA, right? NOAA has closed them down.
Yeah, South Atlantic Marine Fisheries manages it, and they've kept it to very limited harvest. Basically, one per person, 1 to 2 days a year for the last few years, and there's talk of it going even more restricted in the future.
Yeah. And the struggle there is, as anglers we're catching so many of these things. Every time we go offshore, we're catching them. And in places where we used to not catch them before because they've become so abundant. One of the problems is when you release these fish, the mortality rate is still really high. That means the amount of fish that die is still really high because they're getting sharked swimming down. Okay. But the problem is we're catching so stinking many of them that there needs to be a season where we can harvest some of these fish. And these fish these fish were beautiful. We caught so many stinking fish. On the Gulf Coast, I think they have a 100-day season, but on the Atlantic Coast, it's 1 day, 2 day, and if the weather's bad, hopefully they reschedule it. It's been a frustrating point for anglers. But there we were. We whacked a bunch of these fish with spin gear, and Chris says, it's time. Pull out the long rod. And I was like, okay, twist my arm. And so we pull out the fly rod, and I start making some casts. And we didn't showcase this on the episode. But you boys were ragging me. Y'all were getting on me. I don't know if you remember, okay?
Oh, I remember.
Your trout setting. No. Yanking as hard as I can. And we had a broken hook, I think, on the first fish. And this is my fault. I'll take credit. I was so excited that none of us thought about it. I came tight. I strip set. Okay. Came tight, and the hook broke. And it was like, okay, no big deal. We didn't know. We just thought it pulled. Everyone told me I trout set. I pulled the fly from the fish. I came tight, bro. I know what it feels like. I threw it back. I think it was 3 or 4 fish, dude.
There's a few.
And I'm just like, I want to yank my hair out Okay. And we look at the fly. We're like, wait a minute, let's just check the fly. All right. There's no hook point on that fly anymore.
Yeah.
So we switch out the fly and oh, it was nuts, dude. I'm still speechless about it because that fish ate. Okay. You're sight fishing a 10-pound red snapper on the surface and it eats and it's got nowhere to go but down. And all of a sudden, you're backing in 2 seconds.
Oh, you better be quick at clearing that fly line.
You got your hand wrapped around, you're going to lose a finger like that. But man,
it's amazing coming from cat. We tarpon fish on fly. It's hard to get more aggressive than an 80-pound tarpon just removing all the fly line from the deck as fast as you've seen it move. It's incredible how a 10-pound red snapper can do the same exact thing.
Yeah,
just as fast, just as violent, and it's a 10-pound fish.
And
maybe
we're throwing
fish. Yeah,
we're throwing tarpon gear. Like I had a 12 weight, and all I could do was laugh. Like it was so much fun, dude. Like I cannot hit home enough how incredible Chris has this fishery dialed, and how much like if you're not good at throwing fly, it's okay. If you miss one, there's 100 more that want to do the same exact thing the other one did. And it was incredible. It was so much fun. It was a rush. It was a thrill. Listen, fishing is never old for me. Right now it's January. Guys are wrecking. I haven't had a chance to go out, but guys have been wrecking the specks. If you live in other parts of the country, they're called crappie in other parts of the country. Here in Florida, we call them specks, speckled perch. Okay. I've been wanting to do that bad, but I just haven't had time. I get a thrill catching these 8, 10, 12-inch specks. It doesn't matter. But doing the snapper and fly, that was a thrill I had never experienced before. And I mean, it was nuts. I said years ago, I will never go offshore without a fly rod again. Even if you don't need it, even if you don't use it, if the opportunity arises, bro, get it. Get after it. Use it.
It's incredible how many if you keep one ready on the boat, and a lot of offshore boats don't have a good spot for a fly rod, which is unfortunate. I'm lucky my bay boat has a big enough rod locker that I can keep one in there just ready to rip when we're king fishing and stuff. Because I can't tell you how many times we'll roll up on a piece of debris and there's a triple tail on it.
Exactly.
And that triple tail is not going to eat anything you throw at it on an 8,000 with heavy leader or anything like that, And I usually don't have a 3,000 on the boat,
And it was that exact situation. And we're quickly coming to a close. So I'll finish with this. We were filming in Alabama. We're like 50 miles offshore, and we find this giant blue tarp. And of course, we go over to it, and I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of triple tail. And there I was with a boat rod and an 8,000 trying to chuck a piece of shrimp to one of these triple tail. And if I had a fly rod, we caught them. But if I had a fly rod, it would have been completely different. We are coming to our next break. Captain Jonathan Moss is the Captain's Log Radio Show. Captain Chris Shultz is my guest today. We'll be right back.
This is the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.
Hey, welcome back to the Captain's Log Radio Show. It's our last segment. I tell you, I have been wanting to have Chris on the radio show for a while now, and it is amazing how awesome this dude is and how much he knows about fishing, especially in his area of Northeast Florida. He's a full-time guide there, inshore, nearshore, offshore, fly, spin, light tackle, big tackle, giant wahoo plugs that cost $100 each. He's got it figured out. Chris, we are entering it's January. Give us a glimpse of the year. What is your current fishing forecast? What are you focused on? And what are you progressing into with the spring, summer, fall?
So right now it's wahoo season. That's the primary focus. Um, in between days we can get offshore, it's shallow water sight fishing for redfish. If we're doing bay boat trips right now, it's mostly sheepshead. Sheepshead bite's really good. We have a consistent, you know, any day of the year, any day of this time of year, no matter what the wind's doing, you can go out and find some sheepshead usually.
You doing that in the inlet, or are you doing that around docks?
So if it's nice, we're fishing in the inlet. If it's really blown out and it's too nasty to fish the inlet, then we're fishing docks, bridges, rock piles, basically inshore structure. Um, those fish are really structure oriented. They're mostly going to be on some sort of large structure that has the growth on it to support them. So you want to look for an old dock covered in barnacles, a bridge that's been there for years, rubble piles that have been there for a long time. The best docks are the ones that are like falling in the water, like it got taken out by a hurricane 10 years ago and it's just been left sitting there. Those are the ones I really like to look for.
Now, do you take a shovel with you and scrape barnacles? Do you do that technique? Or
there are definitely guys that do it. I personally don't do that. I don't chum either. I'm mostly just looking for the school of fish and just trying to get them while they're biting. We do a lot of like running gun style fishing. If you're going to just sit on one spot, then that chum technique works pretty well.
Gotcha.
It's just not something. Most of the charter guys aren't messing around with that. It's just another layer of stuff you got to deal with. You got 4 people sheepshead fishing. I'm busy tying knots. I don't have time to be scraping oysters, and I'm either netting fish or tying knots. That's pretty much the name of the game on a sheepshead trip.
Yeah.
But the
sheepshead.
So
sheepshead are called, another name is convicts, because they're black and white stripes on their body. They have teeth like a human. Google it if you don't believe me. I know in the northern part of this country, sheepshead are also known as freshwater drum. This is a completely different fish. This is a saltwater sheepshead. Very good table fare. Again,
the West Coast has their own sheepshead too. Totally different fish. The Capt have their own sheepshead that's completely different as well.
Completely different fish.
Yeah.
What's your go-to bait? Are you using fiddler crabs? Are you using cut shrimp? What do you like to fish with?
Fiddler crabs or sand fleas are the go-to. Shrimp would be the third choice. I don't really mess around with the mussels, clams, oysters. There's a whole art form to that where guys are using pantyhose and like all sorts of little basically mesh bags and cramming them full of crustacean and mollusk juice, and I'm sure it works great. I've seen some of the guys that absolutely crush the fish. They swear by it.
Yeah,
it's too much for a char. I'm putting a fiddler crab on, or I'm putting a sand flea on. We're letting it rip, and the fish eat it.
And so you talked about retying a lot of hooks. So with these fish being around structure, they come out of the structure just like offshore. They grab it, they turn around, they go right back into that crevice. If you don't turn that fish and get them away from that dock or that rock pile, all those barnacles that they're feeding off of, all those barnacles that they like eating from, are sharp. I'm talking like very, very sharp. So you end up breaking off. You don't get that fish out of there quickly, you're going to end up breaking off. And so, make sure if you're going to go sheepshead fishing, you got a lot of leader and you got a lot of hooks, because you're going to go through it, man.
Yeah, I use 20-pound fluoro for everything inshore except for sheepshead. We're going up to 30 for that. They're really not that picky, and it's a few less knots.
Yeah, absolutely. My first experience with sheepshead, I was in Southwest Florida. So with my dad, my family, we were on a family vacation, but my dad and I went down to the dock to catch snook. Okay. And when the snook fishing wasn't good, we'd go to the beach at night and we would throw, this is like springtime, like March, we'd throw live shrimp out or cut up fresh dead shrimp, and you'd just reel in really slowly. Weirdest thing, dude. Really slowly. And then they'd come up and smoke it. And these sheepshead were like the size of dinner plates. And we whacked them.
That's
what? I mean,
fun.
I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and that's when I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, what is this? My dad had caught them off of seawalls here on the East Coast, but it wasn't something we ever really targeted until we went down there. And I was like, this is cool, man. These are some unique looking fish.
So actually, my favorite way to sheepshead fish is actually offshore. I don't do it that much anymore because usually if we have a nice enough day, you can go sheepshead fish offshore. Then I'm wahoo fishing. But
Yeah.
on those nice days, if you're not going all the way, if you're in a bay boat or something in North Florida, those kind of party ground numbers are what we call them. Any of
Huh.
those artificial wrecks in
Yeah.
55 to 80 feet, but mostly that like 55 to 70 feet range. They'll get sheepshead on them in the winter and spawning
Huh.
aggregations of fish. And so you can just absolutely wear them out if you find the
Hmm.
right aggregation on one of those spots. And then it's way more fun.
Love that.
You're getting a bite immediately. You're not catching rocks. You're catching sheep's head.
That's awesome. That's
um,
awesome, dude. I didn't know you guys were doing that up there. Heck yeah.
yeah, most of the tournament fish are coming from offshore. There's been few of the tournaments one inshore on nasty days, but a lot of those bigger 10-pound plus fish they're being caught offshore.
Hmm. Tell you, if you want to catch 10-pound sheep's head inshore, Louisiana,
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's
100%.
insane.
Yeah,
It's
their
insane.
fishery is just insane over there.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool.
And if you want to catch
Did
sheep's
it.
head on fly, Louisiana.
Yeah, and I haven't done that yet. I've hooked 3 on fly and have lost all 3 of them where the hook just didn't because of their mouth, the way their
Yep.
teeth are situated. I've seen guys get lucky and it gets wedged into between their teeth, and that's how they get them in. But I haven't taken one on fly. So
Yeah,
soon
I got one on fly here in the flood grass because they will get in the flood with the redfish.
with the redfish.
You'll see 80% redfish, 20% sheep's head in a flood tide here. It's about the ratio.
That's
And those
awesome.
sheep's head will tail so happy. They're far less spooky than the redfish are, but they're
Mm,
far less likely to eat anything you throw at them.
yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, when they do eat it, the probability of you actually getting the right hook set and getting that fish to the boat is low too. So it's
Yep.
just
Absolutely. Okay, so outside of wintertime, we start transitioning to spring. What does your spring look like? What are you focusing on?
so our wahoo fishing carries through essentially through the end of March. Right around the end of March, early April, I'll start transitioning from wahoo to cobia. And for the cobia, that spring run, that's the beach run. So we're looking for manta rays, sight fishing. Fly fishing for cobia is my favorite thing to do in the spring. If we get the right weather, that's what I'm doing.
Hmm.
You got to have full sun. You got to have the right swell. So there's not too many days where you can really do it, but those days that we can do it, it's absolutely my favorite part of our fishery. You're
That's
running the
awesome.
beach, looking for manta rays.
Yeah.
You see this giant manta ray swimming in, usually gin clear water. Uh, and then the cobia will ride on their backs, they'll ride beneath them, like kind of swim around them. I'm not sure what it is with cobia, why they associate with larger fish like the manta rays and the sharks, but it's definitely something with their biology. And that beach migration is it's really fun. It's fun to see the manta rays. Even if you're not catching fish, just watching the rays swim it makes your day.
And these manta rays can get ginormous. 20-foot wingspan.
About 15 foot. Yeah.
And if you're occasionally you'll hear a story of one jumping out of the water and hitting a boater. But if that time of year, if you're out in the ocean near shore, running the beach, so I mean you're close and you're paying attention, you're out looking for these cobia, you can actually occasionally see them free jumping out of the
Mm-hmm.
water, and it is very, very cool to see. I just did a radio show with Captain Chris Agirio from Sea Reaper Charters down in Southwest Florida, and we are talking about cobia. He loves catching cobia. We've caught every time I fish with him, we catch a cobia. Cobia is one of those fish that are just they're a unique fish. They are a curious fish. The brown clown, and they
Mm-hmm.
taste great as well, and a lot of fun. A lot of fun to sight fish off of these rays. throwing a fly or throwing a jig or throwing a big swim bait out in front of them. You just don't want to hook. You don't want to hook the ray. You want to hook
Oh,
the fish.
you don't want to hook the ray.
So you got to make your presentation where you are in front of the ray and you're bringing your lure underneath the ray, or if you're up on top of it, keeping your lure up there. I like throwing, like, this is a great, the DOA bait buster is a great bait to throw at them. But yeah, Kobe or
the only
Kobe
problem with that is it's a little light. So that those fish are so pressured that, especially by the time they get to us in Jacksonville, because I mean,
you got to make that long
the
cast.
Canaveral fishery, the rays spend a lot more time around Canaveral. By the time they get to us, they're mostly just coming by. We get like a couple weeks. So I'll follow the migration usually from Ponce all the way through the state line. But once you get to our area of North Florida, they know the game. The rays have been hooked, the fish have been hooked. They all know what's up. So the farther you can stay off them, the longer cast you can make. I found the better success ratio.
And that's where those jigs come to play. It's got that big jig head
on
that jig.
Yeah.
When they're down here, it's not uncommon to launch Port Canaveral and run all the way up to Ponce, or vice versa. So you are covering that entire zone looking for these fish. Hey, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. If people want to fish with you, they want to book with you, where can they find you?
FishJacksCharters.com. All my info is on there. You can book directly through the website, or you can give me a call, 904-307-3237.
Awesome. That's FishJax, Jax, FishJacksCharters.com. So thankful to know you, have you in my life, and to catch just some incredible fish with you. This is the Captain's Log Radio Show. Thanks for being a part. More coming soon. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.